right, Pete, great. Big cheers for you today. Glad that you're with us. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Patrick. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, would you give our viewers just an idea of who you are, what you're working on, what you're excited about?
Well, you did a great job on the intro, but yeah, my name is Pete Kelly. I'm the CEO of Apartment Life, and we are a faith-based nonprofit that's been serving the multifamily industry for 21 years last month. So we help with one of the greatest needs that's actually been growing in America, which is the loneliness epidemic that you referenced. About a year ago, the insurance company Cigna came out with a pretty interesting study that found that 60% of Americans would describe themselves as being lonely. And if you're an apartment owner and if you're an apartment operator, that's a problem, because if your residents are lonely, that means they don't have any roots in that community. And if they don't have any roots in that community, they're just as likely to move to the community down the street if they're offering a good enough deal. So we have a program that helps with that.
I love it. I like the idea that it's the right thing to do, but I also like how you were able to tie the right thing to do back to, look, do the math. This is important, even if, you're not motivated by the right things. But, the community that we've sold in terms of you're walking into these properties with amenities and, all the fitness centers and all the ways to build community physically. This was amenity that was open. Tell us a little bit about the program, I guess, and how it helps.
Yeah. So, well, you're right in terms of it's actually not only the right thing to do, it's good for people, but it's also good for the bottom line. And we've worked with an economic research firm called Witten Advisors, and they've done several economic impact studies. And they would say on average, when you have a program like this, you can save up to $188,000 a year in turnover costs and marketing savings. And so all the more in the midst of the pandemic that we've been navigating, as you mentioned, all the other amenities were shut down. And for the clients that we serve, they told us, you're the only amenity that's open. And so obviously we had to pivot a little bit. A lot of what we've done, pre-pandemic were face-to-face events. And so the pivot was really caring for our neighbors. And I can get into more detail in terms of how the program works, but a lot of what our coordinators have been doing is doing wellness checks in terms of how are the residents doing, what are their needs. In some cases, they're going out and getting groceries for people who can't afford them because they're unemployed, or getting prescriptions for the elderly. So it's been actually very, very well received, and we were surprised. We grew quite a bit last year because there was a need for it.
Yeah, and so tell me about the coordinators and how everything is structured. They live on site. Let's get into the weeds a little bit more on there, because some may not be familiar with that.
Yeah, so we have a couple different models. So our conventional model that's 21 years old is we have two people that we place in that community, and they live there, their neighbor. They're there officially on behalf of management as well. So they're like an ambassador between the two, and they're like the welcome wagon. So they greet every new resident when they move in. They throw all kinds of parties and events. They're always on the lookout for ways that they can care for people and meet needs. And then 90 to 120 days before that resident's lease is set to renew, they'll do what we call a renewal visit. They'll stop by. They'll say, hey, how are you doing? Are you having a good experience? I sure hope that you're going to stick around. So it's a very nice, soft appeal. But as we've done that, we found that it creates this sticky community where people really like, I know my neighbors and I want to stay here. So it's been very well received. We also have an offsite model that for those who, for whatever reason, can't concede a 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit, that we have an offsite model where the people are like an augmentation to your management team, but they take care of a lot of the same things. They're not a literal neighbor in that sense, but they do bring that neighborliness to the community.
Yeah, neighbor, community. I'm hearing a lot of this in the way that you're explaining it. And over the last couple of days, we've been talking about technology and the acceleration of it and the adoption of it. What is the real differentiator? Is it technology, or is it the human aspect of what you're doing here?
Well, I'm a technophile, so I love technology. I love social media. I love all of that. But I think what we're seeing in America is increasingly we're finding that technology is not meeting some of our core needs, which are connection. And you would think if technology could have solved it, Facebook would have ended the loneliness epidemic, but it's actually gotten worse and worse with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and our country is more divided and lonely than ever before. So I feel like what we are, we're a face-to-face differentiator, that we actually get there and we help residents make friends, and we help them get to know their neighbors. And there's a personableness to it that a chat bot could never replace. Even if we had the most incredible artificial intelligence that could anticipate people's needs, there's something about knowing that there's an actual person on the other side of that communication that makes a big difference.
Yeah, interesting. Amanda's got a question here, which I want to get to in a moment. But first, I want to say, earlier in our talk, we were talking about the demographics of the resident of the future and how we're building and investing in technologies to serve the needs of and a lot of that is consumer driven, from like Uber and Uber Eats and all the things that we've grown familiar with outside the industry. Some of those expectations are coming within. And the comment was that they don't like to talk to others in some cases, that they'd rather text or communicate. And so when you just said help residents make friends, obviously that would be amazing, right? The roots are in the community, and it's come renewal time. Well, maybe I'll stay here or pay a little more because I have that friendship network there. But are you seeing that? I mean, our employees on site aren't really trained to take on that type of a challenge, and at the same time, we're kind of asserting the rules of the lease and all of the things that kind of become more transactional. Is that kind of the gap that you're filling there?
Yeah, I think where technology does help, and I would be a big advocate, is on the transactional side of things. So if you want to pay rent, if you want to submit a work order, if you want to make a complaint, if you want to make an online review, whatever that be, that's more of a transactional relationship. The average apartment resident, they're not expecting to be friends with management, because that's, they're paying rent each month and they can't be friends with the apartment manager. So I would differentiate the transactional element with the relational element. People do want to live in a place where people know them. The old song Cheers, if you remember that TV show, you want to be where everybody knows your name. Or if you remember the TV show Friends, that's everybody's idyllic dream. I'm going to live in this apartment community. I'm going to live with 6 of my best friends and we're going to have a blast. And I think a lot of people, when they move into an apartment community, they're just shocked. Like, I don't know any of my neighbors. And this pandemic's actually, what's funny about the pandemic is people over the last year have kind of lost the art of neighboring. They've lost the ability to make friendships, and they want them more than ever, but they have gotten out of the habit. So they feel socially awkward. So they almost need like a host or a catalyst that brings them together. And that's what we seek to provide.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you design and build these things, you'd think the opposite, right? They're built for that in terms of community. Amanda here has a question, and that is, can you tell us a little bit more about that offsite model? How does that work?
Yeah, so an offsite model, we'll select generally one person, one coordinator. We'll pay them an hourly wage, and so instead of conceding the unit, the owner of the management company pays a higher monthly fee to us, for which we find a coordinator. But they're still doing a lot of the activities. So they're looking for, how do you create a sense of connectedness in the community? And in a lot of lower income affordable communities, what they're doing is actually wraparound services, and they're operating to try to help meet some of the social and physical and economic needs that might be there. So we've got some communities in Seattle and Salt Lake City that we're serving, and a lot of what our resident service coordinators are doing on those communities is they're helping people who've become unemployed and are having a hard time paying rent, and connecting them to community resources that'll help them with some of those needs, whether it is paying rent or groceries or something like that. But obviously our offsite coordinators can also plan events. But what's different is they're not just setting up the event, they're actually playing host. And that's a really key differentiator. You know, if your goal is to put food on a table, you probably don't need apartment life to do that. But if you really want somebody who's going to help your residents get to know one another, that's where having a host who can be thoughtful about the event, make sure that people really are getting to know each other.
Yeah, interesting. I have a note here just to follow up on that question, which was, you know, how, once you are engaged with the on-site staff or management company, how does that get managed? How does what's the interaction there?
Yeah, so our coordinators work hand in glove with the local management team. So they're not out there on their own just planning events without communicating. So typically the month in advance, they're going to say, hey, they're going to bring a proposal to the property manager and say, hey, here's what we're thinking for events next month. How do you feel about the theme? Is there anything that you would add or subtract from this? They coordinate on the marketing of that. Obviously, as we're doing welcome and renewal visits, which are part of our program, and if we identified issues with the residents' move-in experience, we don't wait to the end of the month to communicate on that. We communicate immediately as soon as we're aware of a need that's going on in a resident's life. So they work very closely, but we also have what we call program directors that takes the day-to-day management of that coordinator off of the property manager. So it's not like the property manager suddenly has another direct report, but they do have somebody that they can consult with and work closely with to make sure that these events and that the atmosphere, kind of the goals of the community, are being served.
So Pete, in terms of that renewal visit, what are we learning from that? Because that's something that we try and master in the timing and how do you show up, get nice right before the renewal time. But what are you learning from these conversations in these visits?
Well, that's a great question. One of my favorite stories is a single mom named Kathy out of Houston, and our coordinator, our team in that place, there was a husband and wife who served as coordinators in that community. They came by to do the renewal visit, and they said, hey, Kathy, we've really enjoyed getting to know you. It's been fun. You come out to all the events, and are you thinking about sticking around? And Kathy was honest with them. She said, no, actually, I'm not. I just put a deposit on another place. And they said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. What happened? They said, well, I've got this spider infestation, and the management team has not been able to solve it. And so I put a deposit on another place, and I'm moving out. And they're like, Kathy, we're really sorry to hear that. We've really enjoyed getting to know you as our neighbor. Well, funny, Kathy that night reaches out and emails the team, the coordinators, and says, I was just thinking ever since your visit about the type of community that you guys have created here. And this is the kind of place that I want to raise my daughter, where she actually knows her neighbors. So I'm going to let go of that deposit. And she let go of the money. She didn't get it back. And I'm going to renew my lease. And I thought that was incredible. That was an incredible story that just illustrates the power. But again, that takes a human element. I don't know that an AI chatbot would ever be able to accomplish the same thing as a face-to-face visit like that.
Yeah, it's a good point. And we've got a question from the audience. Tara asks, what has been the most impactful event that maybe Apartment Life has hosted? And then also, how do you measure the success of an event?
Wow. Boy, that would be hard to say what was the most impactful event. Well, I'll tell you, I'm in Texas. So, 2-3 weeks ago, we had that horrible freeze that affected the whole state of Texas. And most of the state lost power. There were rolling blackouts, but I know from my family, we were without power and heat for 36 hours. It got pretty cold. Well, the problem with apartment owners in Texas right now are a lot of those pipes have burst. And so it's created chaos. There's a lot of people who are having to move out of their apartments, or their furniture's been damaged, and it's been a really stressful time. So one event, so to speak, that comes to mind is we were able to partner with somebody and raise some money for some food trucks and just say, hey, we know it's been a hard week. We just want to treat y'all to a free meal. And we had these food trucks at each of the communities. Most of them were communities that Apartment Life was serving, but we even kind of picked 10 that we weren't currently serving and just said, hey, we're going to go above and beyond the call of duty and serve those apartment communities as well. So that would be an event, but it's honestly multiple events. So I don't know, Patrick, if that got at the question or not.
I think so. It's funny because when you think of an event, I mean, technically what we're doing here is an event in some way, right? There's a learning outcome and maybe connections and things like that. I know for us, we focus on how people feel. And so, for example, Carrie and I, who built this business together, we thought when we're doing our in-person events, it's a little bit more of similar to what you guys are doing, where there's human-to-human interaction, not just all virtual. And one of the measurement tools that we used in this aspect was we wanted people to say when they left, "I'm so glad we came." And we knew that if everybody from the team, their goal was to make sure that anybody that was an attendee left saying, "I'm so glad they came." That's having the right questions, the right learning, the right food, all that stuff. And but that stuff is hard to measure sometimes because, and they don't always tell us, right? The experiences. We often hear the stuff that they need help with and things like that. But that connection's very powerful. What's next for you guys? It seems like you were in a spot that accelerated the need for this. Also, with the idea that the amenities were closed, how did you shift through all those things, and what were those conversations like with your not only current customers but the ones you're trying to get?
Yeah, so we did pivot it. So we, again, to go back to what I said earlier, we shifted a lot more to the care and to helping residents figure out how they're going to navigate if they're unemployed and they can't pay rent. And we actually had a couple clients reach out to us and said, hey, we just need you to do wellness checks for all of the people living in our community, just to check on them, to make sure that they're doing okay. And so, yeah, we said, hey, we'd be happy to do that. And so we just did wellness checks. We just called through the rolls, and if people didn't answer, we emailed them and we texted them just to check to see, hey, your management team, your owner cares for you, and we just want to know, are there any needs that we can meet? So that's some of how we've had to pivot in the last year. But as we go into 2021 and Lord willing, the pandemic winds down, there's been a lot increasing demand, I'll say, from a couple different sectors. So we've had a lot of people, owners of affordable communities, that have reached out and they said, hey, we need help with the wraparound services and we need a solution. And so increasingly that's becoming a growing arm of the business, if you will. There's been a lot of interest in senior communities where there's a ton of events and there's a lot of loneliness and a lot of need for connection. And so we've had a lot of owners of senior communities reach out to us, and even student communities as well. Student housing is an area of growth for the coming year. Yeah,
and I mentioned earlier about that we all would agree that this building that community and engaging people in events and the renewal visits, we would like our on-site teams to do that and empower them to do that. But priorities shift. There's transition of companies and staff and all kinds of things that become urgent in the matter of taking care of the complexities of this little mini city that they run. It's not an easy job. And so does that lead to more not engage with like an Apartment Life starting and stopping, and not as much sort of consistency in terms of the ongoing nurturing of this community relationship?
So Patrick, I just want to make sure I understand your question. Are you saying because the on-site management team is preoccupied with other things, how does that impact their use or non-use of Apartment Life?
Yeah, so no, for example, if the property manager's goals are to take care of community, rent apartments, take care of real estate, who knows, an accident happens and there's an issue they've got to divert to, right? Mm-hmm. And with Apartment Life, you have this sort of team in place this continuity program where there's this sort of one thing focus on, it doesn't shift from priority to priority, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
I know managing teams on site that it's like, occupancy drops and all of a sudden, yeah, we're planning this, little party.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, no,
Yep.
that's great, but focus here now.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, actually, that's a very good point, and that is the case. I haven't met anyone who works in property management that doesn't want to create a sticky community. I haven't met anyone who's like, I don't like my residents. Sometimes they don't like, getting yelled at, but generally they want to do that. These are things that they want to do, but they don't have time to do, or they don't have time to do consistently. Or if you're, a leasing agent, or if you're a property manager, assistant property manager, and the event is scheduled for Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, you want to be home with your family. And so it's nice to be able to know that that event is going to be taken care of. You got somebody who's actually lives there, who cares about the atmosphere and the environment that's working on your behalf to create that sticky community. And there's that consistent feature. And especially as communities sell, that's the other consistency element I'll mention, is that a lot of times these apartment communities are selling because the real estate is going up in value. And sometimes the apartment life team is extremely helpful in that transition to the new management. And so, because they are the continuity between the two.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Amanda has a question here on, and maybe it's for one of your coordinators, but how do you overcome low participation in community events?
Yeah, well, it takes sometimes a little bit of trial and error and getting to know people. This is why the holistic system works with the welcome visits, the acts of care, the events, the renewal visits, because the more you're out there getting to know your community, you start to put your finger on what are the events that people are going to want to come out to. And so you might have in your mind that they want to do one thing. They want a yappy hour where all the dogs come, and actually what they want is they want to wind down Wednesday. They want to just uncork something and have stimulating conversations. So some of that is just having variety. And this is another way that our program can help. If you're the management team and you got a lot on your plate, it's hard to think creatively. And so just, through trial and error, you start to get to know your community and what are the things that people respond to. So food is one thing, but it's got to be a little bit more than food. It's got to be tapping into their personal interests and tapping into interests that enable them to make relationships.
Yeah, and I'm assuming your coordinators are going through special training and have you're recruiting the special personalities and that can relate to the different types of scenarios that they may be coming into. Yeah, absolutely. We do pretty extensive training, and we get our coordinators collaborating with other coordinators in their same cities, so they can say, hey, we just did this event and it was awesome. Or we just did this event and no one showed up, and so I wouldn't recommend it. So that's the nice thing is they're not just operating in isolation in that community, but they have a network of other apartment life teams and coordinators in their city that they could collaborate with. Yeah, and how quickly is this onboarding? Once somebody says yes, I want this for my community, they reach out. What's next?
Yeah, so depending on the market, we can operate anywhere in the United States, and we're actually operating in Alberta, Canada, and soon in the United Kingdom. But in newer markets or markets where we're not as present, it can take sometimes 3 months to identify a team because just the brand recognition is not as strong. But in cities that were a lot more established, sometimes we can have a team that same month that they request for services. We have a pretty strict vetting system that we use. So for every 12 people that apply, one gets through and gets placed, and they've got to meet, quite a lot of criteria. They got to have the margin in their lives because this is not a full-time job. They do this in the nights and the weekends. They have to be a people person, but they also have to be administratively savvy because we have to report back each month to the client and make sure they're getting value. So they have to straddle that being very winsome and yet very professional at the same time, have margin, be able to live in that specific community. So anywhere from a month to 3 months is what I would say.
Yeah. Well, where can people find more information? is website? Do they reach out to you? What do you suggest people that want to learn about what's next?
Yeah, if you go to apartmentlife.org, there is all kinds of information. You can watch a couple of videos that kind of tell a little bit about our program. You can see examples of the events that we do, testimonies from people in the apartment industry who are using it. Look at our board of directors, got an incredible board of directors represented from the apartment industry. So yeah, apartmentlife.org.
Very good, very good. And you've done some great work, not only for the brand that you're building, but for the industry. And what do you see next, I guess, for where we're going with all of this?
With the industry? Well, I was talking with one very large management company. I won't mention the specific name, but really I see the direction that the industry is going is increasing automation. I see the use of technology to run these communities as leanly as possible so that they're as profitable as possible, using technology to replace the transactional relationships. But even in that conversation with that management company, one of their concerns was, yeah, but what does that do to the feel in the community of our place? And in that conversation, I say, yeah, we plan to keep using you because we see that actually being an even stronger need as things become more and more automated.
Very well, very well. Yeah, it's that human touch. We heard earlier other operators talking about the white glove service, 5-star experience, all of that stuff, and that comes from. And I liked what you said, automating some transactional activity, the tasks that maybe I'm not as good at doing, but maybe you're better at, inspiring and engaging with residents and doing all the great stuff. It's been awesome to spend the time. Are there any final thoughts that you want to share with our viewers before we wrap up here?
Well, just that, hey, this has been a crazy year and it's been a hard year. And if you're watching this and you feel a little bit lonely, you're not alone. I think the whole nation is in that. But I would encourage you, just like your apartment residents need relationships, make sure you have relationships too.
Awesome, awesome. So great to be with you today. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks,
We'll see
Patrick.
you in the next show. All right.